So the top horizontal line I have here is my shoulder line. From that point, I'm going to place my tape like so and measure all my vertical measurements: shoulder to the bust line, shoulder to the nipple point, shoulder to the under bust, shoulder to the waist, that's the high waist, and then shoulder to the low waist based on the style of the dress we're making, and then the V shape at the bottom part of the dress. So I'm going to make horizontal lines across these points like so. Note that the edge from where I'm placing the tape now is the center front, which is on the fold. So shoulder line, that's half of the shoulder, and then I took 1 inch down, 3 inches width for the neck, and then for the shoulder slants I'm connecting it like so. The neck deepness, I'll be using 3 as a standard. I'll curve with my French curve. And then whatever I have at that top, I'll measure it at this bust line as well, like so. Mark that point and I'll connect those 2 points together with my ruler. And then we have to make our armhole curve. So mark the center point of this armhole line, fold the tape like this, mark that point, and then go inwards by half an inch. Although we don't need this top part, but we're just trying to have the standard bodice. Connect it from that top to this point here, and then make sure that the French curve doesn't go below the bust line, and curve it like so. I'm going to label all the lines. So this is my bust point line, and that's my bust line, which is like the chest line. My under bust line, the high waist, and then the low waist. Then based on the style of the dress, the bottom part, that line represents that. So now from on the bust point line, I'll mark half of my bust point to bust point measurement, which is a nipple to nipple measurement. For me, it's 7. If you divide it by 2, it will give you 3.5. Add half an inch to it, that will be 4. So I just marked 4 inches there, and I'll make a straight vertical line downwards. So you want to make sure the line is straight. On the bust line, I'll mark 1 inch upwards and 1 inch downwards, just like I'm doing. That's to prevent the bust points from pointing out. So on the waistline, I'm measuring 0.75 on both sides of the dart line. And then I'll connect to my ruler like so. And I also connect it downwards to that bottom line, slightly above it. So this is going to be our dart. So now I'll measure all the circumference measurements. So on that bust line, I'll be measuring 1/4 of my bust measurement. I'll add the sewing allowance. On the chest line, I'll do the same. Whatever I have on the bust point line should be the same on the chest line. And I'll add the sewing allowance. On my waist line, I'm going to measure 1/4 of my waist circumference measurement. I'm going to mark that. And then I'll add whatever I'm taking off from the dart. So if you measure it, that should be like 1.5. So I'm going to add 1.5 of this dart. I'm going to replace it because we're taking that off. So I'll replace it back. So on the underbust line, I'm going to measure quarter of the underbust circumference measurement. Whatever that is going to be taken off as the dart, I'm going to replace it and add the back. Like so, that should be like half an inch. Then I'm going to add the sewing allowance as well. So yeah, I forgot to add the sewing allowance on the waistline. So yeah, 1 inch sewing allowance. So on the low waist, I'll measure quarter of the low waist circumference, which is 30 divided by 4. And whatever that is going to be taken off as the dart, I would replace it just like I did on the other horizontal lines. So I'm replacing it like so. Then I'll add the sewing allowance of 1 inch. So now I'll be connecting all those points at the edge side of the dress like so. I'm basically trying to connect. We're connecting from where the sewing allowance points ends. So now we need to, based on the style of the dress, if you notice there's a straight, the center of it is straight downwards. So I'm taking 2 inches. You can do more than 2 inches, but for me, I'll be working with 2 inches. Now you have to take away the sewing allowance and then you measure from that point where you see my marker. You measure and connect it to where the 2 inches is. And then you use your ruler to make a straight vertical line downwards like I'm doing. So I'm taking 0.75 on that chest line like you can see, and I'll connect it downwards to the underbust line like so. And then I'm going to use the breast cup. You take away the ½ inch sewing allowance from the breast cup. Make a round curve with your pencil because we're going to, this is not the original line. So please note the ½ inch sewing allowance on the breast cup. It should be placed exactly on that point like I'm indicating. So we're going to trace. Yeah, so keep tracing. Keep tracing. If you notice, I'm not positioning the breast cup right exactly on the underbust line. That's because this is not the curve we're going to use at the end of the day. So we'll be going up by ½ an inch. So this is going to be our true underbust curve. So I'm just going to be marking that all through the curve we just drew. So I have to use my eraser to clean up the pencil one because we're not going to be working with that. So now I can use my marker to curve this round. So you can use your French curve so that you have a smooth curve. So this is the true breast curve. You need a masking tape, and you're going to be masking the breast cup like I'm doing all through. I would have preferred to use a wider one, but I'll be working with what I have at the moment. So you just be spreading the masking tape on the breast cup like so. So what we're trying to do is just to get the shape. So now you're going to be using your marker to trace round the curve of the breast cup on the masking tape like so. And then you can go down on this part by 2 inch. For some people, it depends on what you really want. But I'll be working with on this part 2 inches. That's the side of the breast. On the other part, I'm going to be using 1/4. So I'll be using my tape rule to have a smooth curve on it like so. So for you, if you want yours to go up a bit, because it's a 3-part breast cup, if you want yours to go up a bit, so you use a smaller measurement So I'm curving it. I'm using a different color of marker, as you can see, just to indicate that that will be representing the 3 cup. So please make sure I'd already indicated where I'm drawing this line out, indicated where it's going to be. So label it like so. That's the side, and the one I wrote initially is the center. So let's put it like set side 2 and center 1. So that when you're matching it up back, you would not make a mistake. So you label it like so we can match it up. So you take it off from the breast cup. So now we have the curve we need. First of all, we separate the top part of the breast cup. So you can see why we needed to make those labels. So we don't put the wrong parts together. So we need to trim off those edges. We don't actually need them. Trim the edges off. So I've placed it on another pattern paper, and I'm just adding sewing allowance to it. That's the sewing allowance I'll use to match them all back together. So if you notice, I'm not going to add sewing allowance at the bottom part. I'm just adding at the center of it and the top of it, like so. So please do the same when you're drafting yours. So you can do 1/2 inch or 1/4 of an inch, depending on what you want. I'm adding sewing allowance to that curve for the underbust, because we're actually going to need sewing allowance. So I can actually do this as well on the fabric, but I've just decided to do it on the pattern paper. Notice you need to match it up, so because when we're sewing it, we need it to be equal. So when you get to that dots line, you mark it, and then you move that point to the other leg of the dart, like so. I hope you can see what I'm trying to explain here. So that point that you've marked on the first leg of the dart, you move it to the second leg of the dart, like so, because we need to do that because that dart will be taken off, and then you extend it upwards like so. If you don't do that, you'll be having a shortage. So now I'm going to extend the lines of the top line of the cup like so that at the end of the day they would all match up when I close up my darts or when I cut off my darts. So smoothing out anywhere you see a sharp curve, smoothing it out. So if you want to know, if you notice, the length of my pattern paper is not long enough based on the full length of the dress. So when I'm cutting on my fabric, I'm going to extend it as much as I want. So I'm just using the original length of the pattern paper. cutting right through the sewing allowance. And like I said earlier, we don't need the top part, but we'll be using it because of the strap of the dress. So we're going to use it to draft the strap of the dress. That's why we needed to draft it. So you can see I'm cutting right through the sewing allowance. Like so. So this is what we have now. And so I'll be cutting off the darts off as well. So I'll cut off the other leg of the darts. So make sure your pattern paper is on fold. So you can see we have 2 pieces of the side. So that's exactly what you want to have as well. So we're done with the front part of this dress. So let's move to the back. So I'm going to make an horizontal line like I did on the front part of the dress. So from that horizontal line, I'll be measuring all my vertical measurements. Just the same thing we did, but slight difference. So shoulder to the bust line, shoulder to the waist, and shoulder to the low waist, and the bottom of the style of the dress. So we don't need shoulder to under bust, and we don't need a shoulder to the nipple point. So I'm making horizontal line across those points, as you can see. So I'm marking vertical line representing my zipper allowance. So you have to extend that line downwards. So I want to label the lines. That's my chest line. This is my high waist line. This is my low waist line. So that's high waist, and this is low waist. And then for the shape of the style of the dress, that's all that bottom line you see there represents that. So on my high waist line, I'm going to mark my darts, which is 4 inches. So remember, I'm placing my tape from that zip allowance line. You want to make sure your tape is positioned right on that line that we drew. This line you can see here. Yes, so that's what you're going to do. So let me just indicate that is our center back line. So from the center back, we're marking the darts measurement, half of the darts, which is the nipple to nipple measurement, 4 inches. Remember how we did that at the front panel. So I'll do that on the bust line as well, and also on the low waist line. So I'll be using my ruler to connect those points together like so. Yeah, I need to extend this line upwards. On the center back line, I'm marking my shoulder width measurement, half of it, which is 7.5. Come down by 1 inch for the shoulder slant. Measure the horizontal neck width, which is 3 inches standard. The depth of the back neck, which is 1 inch. 1 inch is fine. So you curve it. So the front neck deepness is usually lower than the back, but it totally depends on the style you're making. So it's not like it's a must that the back must be higher than the front. So it just depends on the style. So you connect the shoulder slants, and then you extend the line downwards to the bust line. So you want to mark the center of that armhole line you just made. Make a point there to indicate where the point is. And then use your French curve to curve out the back armhole line. You also want to make sure that the French curve does not go below the bust line. So the next thing you want to do is to mark on the high waist line. You want to mark 0.75 on both sides of the dart line, like so, and then you connect it. You can see where that point is. That should be your chest line. You want to extend your dart line up to the chest line, like so, and then you connect your dart leg to that point upwards. You do the same on the other side. Connect it downwards as well. So I'm marking 2 inches from the center back, or 2.5, whichever one you want to use, just like I did at the front. So I'm marking all my circumference measurements, the quarter of the bust measurements. So the bust circumference divided by 4, I'm marking it, and then whatever I'm taking off from the dart here, I'm going to add it back like I did for the front panel, and I'll add my sewing allowance 1 inch. So on the high waistline, you're going to do the same thing. Place your tape at the center back and mark quarter of your waist measurements. Also, whatever you're taking off from the dart, which is like 1.5, you add it back to the measurements, and then you add your sewing allowance of 1 inch. You want to go to the low waistline as well. From the center back, mark quarter of your low waist measurement, and whatever that will be taken off from the darts, you replace it at the side, and then you add your sewing allowance of 1 inch. Now we're connecting those points at the side of the dress like so. So the next thing you want to do is to make that shape we did at the front panel based on the style of this dress we're making. That's V-like shape. So I just want to make sure you know I took 2 inches downwards from that low waist line, and so I really don't want it to be as much as 2 inches, so I came up by half an inch. So we curve from that point downwards, and this is exactly what we did at the front panel as well. Add your sewing allowance, half an inch. So you connect all your points like I'm doing. Curve it like so. Make sure the curve is smooth. So on the zip allowance, we need to create that dent. You know, the back of the waist is not popping out. If you don't do that, you're going to have a bulge coming out. So we're going to take half of that measurement of the zip allowance, and you connect from that point. So whatever you have as the zip allowance, you mark the center of it, and you connect to your chest point. As you can see, I'm placing the ruler in such a way that it would extend slantly, in a slanting manner, to the point I just indicated, and I'll extend it to the hip line as well. So I didn't measure my hip measurement. So from the waist line, now I'm taking my hip line, which is 8 inches. So I want to make sure that my zip curve is curving to that hip line. So I want to match up the side of the front panel. So I just labeled it. That's the side of the front panel. So I want to match it up to make sure that when I'm sewing the dress, it's going to be properly aligned. So I'm just labeling it side panel, or rather front side panel. So that's the bottom of it matching up to the waist. and then to the bust. So I want to mark that point so that they would tally. So now you curve, you make a curve to that point from the center back line. And then if you decide to add the sewing allowance at the back, you can, or you can as well do what I did at the front panel. When you're cutting on the fabric, you can add, but always make sure you indicate so that you don't forget to add your sewing allowances. Very important. So I just decided to mark sewing allowance on the back panel. So I'll be cutting right through that sewing allowance line. So make sure you're curving it, you're cutting it according to what you just drafted. So you want to trim off that part you don't need at the zip allowance. So that's the part that should go off. So you trim off the dart as well. Just follow through the lines that you indicated. So we have two of the side back. The side panel we have two. That's because we had folded our pattern paper into two before we started drafting. And we're cutting the other leg of the dart. So open up the zip allowance and then label it center back. Indicate half-inch sewing allowance is needed at that point. So when you're cutting on your fabric, you don't forget. Make an arrow. So I always do that so that I don't forget. So make an arrow that you need sewing allowance at that side. So we need to extend half-inch when we're cutting on the fabric. If we don't do that, we would have shortage of measurements. So sewing allowance, SA, add half-inch sewing allowance at that part so that we can use it to match it up back when we are sewing. So I'm labeling the front panel as well, side, front side, and center front. And make sure that that point that I just indicated is on fold. You can see, so that when you open it up, it doesn't separate. So you need half an inch sewing allowance at that area as well. Add half-inch sewing allowance at that point, and also add half-inch sewing allowance at this center front as well. That's the dart area. So now this is how it's all going to match up. When you're sewing, you're going to sew the two sides, that's the front side and the back side together, like so. So I'm matching it up, but you can see it's not matching up exactly because on the front side I did not add sewing allowance, but I did at the back. So please make sure you add half-inch sewing allowance at the top. So that's what I'm writing there, half-inch sewing allowance at the top of the front panels.